Chapter 22. You have to be kidding me, said Riona, blushing. I wish I were, said Ember. We have been fortunate so far, but we are moving into areas occupied by Char settlers, war bands, and small patrols. We can travel by day as a Char and are captured human renegades. Dougal nodded at the idea, but Riona said, You cannot expect us to be unarmed and defenseless in the midst of Char territory. Remind me, said Gulick. Have we had this discussion before? It seems oddly familiar. Give me a moment, said Dougal, and steered Riona away from the others. She resisted stiffly, but finally went with him. You realize you sound like Ember when we were at Ebonhawk. And look how that turned out, said Riona hotly. But she's right, and you asked me a while back if I trust her. I do, and you should as well. It's not her I'm suddenly doubting. She looked accusingly into his eyes. Despite himself, Dougal turned away, shamed and silenced. Here's what I need to know, she said. What you said back on the battlements of Ebonhawk. You promised. Did you mean it? Will you help me get the claw? Dougal felt his face grow hot. Of course, yes. I meant it. We will get the claw of the Connor. All right then, she said, and walked over to Ember, now holding the chains. She held her wrists up to be shackled. Let's do this and get on the road. In the end, the chain manacles, originally fitted for the Char's wrists, were too large for the humans. Cranks rearranged the metal cuffs and chains, fitting one wrist manacle around Riona's neck and one around Dougal's, and settled for loose ropes around their wrists. The third large cuff, which had been fitted for the Char's neck, Ember handed to the Norn. You are their keeper, said Ember. Norn mercenaries are common enough. No one will question why a Char is using a Norn. Keep an eye on prisoners. And how do you explain me perched on his shoulder, said Cranks. You'll be walking, I'm afraid, said Ember, and pull out that lightning rod of yours. It's non-functional, said the Azura. The metaspell solenoids are shot. Then don't tell anyone that, said Ember. Just threaten our prisoners with it. Looks superior. That I can do, said Cranks. Please don't try to enjoy this, said Riona through gritted teeth. I promise to try, said Ember, as Gulick put the human weapons into his satchel. Dougal hated to lose the sword, but Ember left him with his locket and the golem's eye, and most importantly, his lockpicks. Ember took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, then led their contingent out into the day. The early going was as it had been the previous night, rolling fields interrupted by fenced paddocks. Dougal now saw that the fences were topped with sawtooth shards of metal, and was glad they had not stumbled into one of them. There were more herds of cattle and clusters of larger, furrier creatures, Dolyaks. When they intruded on their fields, the Dolyaks retreated into a tight circular formation, their horns turned outward. After about a mile, they reached a more established path, heading generally east to west. Ember turned the group west, and their time improved. Then, cresting a rise, they encountered another group of Char. Despite himself, Dougal almost stumbled in his chains, and Gulick shot him a stern, withering look. There were only about 10 of them, merchants and guards clustered around a single heavily laden wagon drawn by a tired-looking Dolyak. At the sight of the group with the human prisoners, the Char visibly reacted, some reaching for their weapons. Ember saluted them and marched past, a somber, superior Gulick in her wake, with the humans and Cranks bringing up the rear. Dougal tried to keep his head down, but hazarded a glance at the Char as they passed. Some looked at them with curiosity, some with surprise, and a very few with open hostility, their lips curled back in anger. Dougal put his head back down and concentrated on the ground in front of them. Whenever they came upon another group, path gathered trails from other side and became more of a road now, with two well-worn wagon ruts and a high grassy crest in the middle. They passed more merchants and farmers as well, in ones or twos. The farmers or ranchers or civilians stood aside as Ember brought her group through, and mutters and whispers followed them. They themselves stood aside when a Blood Legion warband marched up on the road. Ember saluted again. The front ranks returned her salute, but no one stopped to question them. In the back ranks, a couple of Char, male and female alike, thumped their chest and roared as they passed the human, and then laughed with their fellows. About midday, they reached a crossroads set up with a ring of fully manned war wagon. Ember halted them 100 feet from the perimeter and said to Gulick in a loud voice, You two watch the prisoners. I need to eat. I may bring something back. Then she set off, the Norn pulling Riona and Dougal to one side. Cranks took up a position nearby with his inoperative lightning wand. I swear, said Riona softly, that she is enjoying all of this. Dougal shook his head. He was worried, just like you were back in Ebonhawk. Everything rests on her. One false move, and we are all done. A few more Char passed them, most of them scowling. Gulick scowled back. No one gave them any trouble, and after about 10 minutes, Ember returned with a satchel. She fished out a prodigious slab of beef for the Norn, smaller slices and rolls for the humans and Azura. What is it? Said Riona. It's warm, said Cranks with a laugh. Dougal realized that in their furtive travel they had not had a fire or a warm meal since Ebonhawk. Feeding your pets, Kitling, said a rough bass voice, and Dougal looked up to see a broad-shouldered Char lurching towards them. Dougal would have guessed he was an older Char, as his muzzle was fuzzy with gray and his horns were dull and worn. He was in battered, archaic armor, and Dougal noted that his left hand was mangled, missing a few fingers. Despite his appearance, Ember pounded her chest in a salute. Ember Doomforge, Ash Legion. The older Char returned the salute, though stiffly. Fell below the Savage. Iron Legion. Before I mustered out, I notched my sword on enough of these mice over the years. Why are these ones still alive? Ember shrugged. I don't question my superiors. I merely carry out their orders. These vermins go to the Black Citadel, Imperial business. I think they're spies. Huh? Said Fellblow. You need them both alive? Dougal's heart dropped in his boots. For the moment, said Ember, and forced a laugh. The Iron Legion Char laughed as well and moved on. Dougal suddenly realized that he had been holding his breath. Ember pointed to the west. She said quietly, this road will eventually take us to the Black Citadel. Instead, we'll cut north when no one else is on the road. The Lore Claws are north of us, and beyond them, the Ascalon Basin. Beyond that is the city. Gulick and Cranks nodded. Dougal looked at Riona, and her eyes were alive with a terrible fury. A half-mile west of the crossroads, the land turned rockier, and now there were fewer ranches and almost no road traffic. Ember led them off the road and up into the hills. The land was as much as it had been before the Char invaded, perhaps as it was before the humans arrived. Great boulders and faces of gray granite framed the valleys, worn by water and the insidious roots of slender young trees. The wind kicked up from the north, bearing with it a cool breeze. Should be easier for a while, said Ember, at least until we reach the basin itself. Then you should let us out of these, said Riona, pulling at the neck shackle. It was leaving a red welt on her flesh. Not yet, Ember looked at the humans. I only said easier. These lands are not without peril. There are bandits in these hills, some humans, some Char, some other races. And there are patrols here. There's less of a chance that some group will come upon us, but that chance exists. What she is saying, put in Cranks, is that the legions rule these lands like the human queen does hers. They rule the cities and control the roads, but in the wildlands between the villages and the camps, a traveler is on his own. Ember ignored the Azura and looked at Dougal. If there is a problem, free her first, she pointed at Riona. Dougal nodded. They walked through most of the day without major incident. Once they came upon a small family of devourers, huge scorpions with two poisonous tails, feasting on the corpse of a deer. Devourers hissed and arced their double tails in warning, and Ember gave them a clear berth. They finished off the last of the food that Ember had purchased, pressed on, looking for a suitable place for the evening. That is when they heard shouts ahead, clash of metal, gunfire, and explosions. Ember and Gulick looked at each other, then carefully made their way up the rocky hillside, the Norn dragging Riona and Dougal with him. Cranks kept an eye on their rear flank. The Char and the Norn crawled the last few feet to the crest of the hill, and the humans followed, topping the rise. Dougal was surprised by what he saw. Char fighting Char. There was a bowl-shaped valley beneath them, dominated by a great campfire, and lined with about a half-dozen tents. The valley had a prominent entrance, and through that cleft a patrol of Blood Legion warriors were pressing their way into a group of Char in red golden armor. The Blood Legion warriors were led by a great black-furred Char, armed with a fiery sword, who shouted orders as the turmoil milled around them. The red golden defenders were being pushed back, but some of them were armed with rifles that shot fire, playing them over the attackers like water from a hose. Near the campfire, a Char in ornate robe was shouting what Dougal could only think of as an incantation. Flame Legion, snarled Ember, her eyes alight and her lips pulled back from her teeth. To Gulick, she said, "You stay here. I'll be right back." Riona barked, "No!" But Ember had already risen and was half leaping, half tumbling down the far side of the hill. Dougal cursed as well. He could think of no advantage in going into battle with the Char. In her dark armor, Ember might be identified as a friend of the Blood Legion, but any human in their midst was a target. Ember was down among the tents now, bearing down on the shaman by the fire, her heavy blade drawn. Already, the Char shaman's voice was reaching a crescendo, and something large was stirring from among the timbers of the flame. As Dougal watched, a wicker-shod arm wrapped itself in flame issued from the heart of the great campfire. Gulick cursed, and Dougal saw that the Norn was trying to physically restrain himself from charging into the battle. He looked at the emerging creature, then back at the humans, and then to the camp again, like a dog desperate for a treat. "An effigy," he said at last. "The Flame Legion has summoned a flame effigy. I've heard of them, but I've never seen one. Never fought one." "Go," snapped Cranks. "I'll keep watch up here. Just don't get killed." Without further encouragement, Gulick dropped his end of the chain, pulled his battle axe, and with a cry that resounded through the bowl of the valley, threw himself down the steeper inner hillside. Dougal thought that, at the Norn's shout, every Char's head in the battle turned towards them, before resuming their internecine struggle. There was gunfire, and shots passed over their heads from Blood Legionnaires, unsure if they were possible allies or reinforcements for the Flame Legion. Dougal, Riona, and Cranks flattened themselves on the hilltop. "Spring the lock, said Riona, pointing to her neck. Dougal looked down at the battlefield. Ember had reached the Flame Legion shaman, and in a single blow cut him down. He crumpled like a set of empty robes, but his enchantment had succeeded. Another heavy arm reached out of the flame, and now rising from the heart of the campfire was a giant's head wrapped in fire, a mockery of a Char warrior's head. Gulick was making for it. Fearful some would reach it first and deny him his fair slaughter of the creature. Ember said, if something happens, free me, said Riona sharply. This qualifies. Do it. Dougal pulled out the pouch with his lockpicks from his pocket, and as he did, he noticed that there was someone behind him. The Flame Legion soldier had appeared at the base of their hill, away from the battle. He wore a cumbersome backpack and held a strange rifle attached to the backpack by a flexible pipe. Whether the Char was a deserter or a picket or a patrol, he spotted them now. Hurry, said Cranks. I'll keep him busy. The Azura raced down the hill, brandishing his useless lightning wand. The Flame Char lifted his rifle, and a jet of fire spat from its barrel. A stream of liquid flame that laced towards the Azura. The Azura yelped and threw himself out of the way, dancing into a thicket of brush. Dougal bent his head and concentrated on foiling the lock. It was a simple matter. The lock thrown to him and sprung before, it pulled away from Riona easily. The Flame Char had followed Cranks and now played by his flame rifle through the thicket, igniting the brush. As a result, he did not see Riona bearing down on him until the last moment. She slammed into him hard, and the pair tumbled together down the hillside. She pulled away from him as the tube connecting the rifle and the backpack broke, and fire in a thick trail streamed behind the Legionnaire. The air took on a smoggy tang from the burning brush, and Dougal's eyes watered. Bottom of the hill, the Char struggled loose from his backpack, which apparently carried the rifle's fuel, his fur smoking. Before him, slightly uphill, Riona faced him. She was armed with a rock that she had picked up. For a moment, the two locked eyes, and then the Char did something Dougal did not expect. He bolted, turned, and ran from a stone-wielding woman. Riona let out a cry and chased after him. Dougal shouted as well and started down the hill, gathering up the lengths of chain to use as a weapon. Halfway down, he heard some urgent coughing, and Cranks stumbled out of the scalded brush. His bare arms were blistered, his wide-eyed, rheumy from the smoke. You're alive, said Dougal, and he realized how happy he was. Only for the moment, said the Azura. Get me my pack. Dougal looked at where Riona had disappeared, and then back up to the hill where the pack still lay. He half walked, half carried the Azura back up the hill, where he dug through his pack filled with wax paper wrappings, finally producing a reddish filter. He drank it down without further comment, and then spent a long moment spewing up black powder. The flesh on his bare limbs crusted and fell away, revealing new flesh, a lighter shade of gray beneath. Dougal looked down into the valley. The Flame Legion troops were breaking, and the Blood Legionnaires were upon them, cutting them down in ones and twos. More importantly, Ember and Gulick had engaged the effigy, the Char dancing forward and lacing the creature with the tip of her sword, enraging it, while the Norn hacked at its burning legs with the zeal of a crazed lumberjack. As Dougal watched, the huge creature swayed, then fell backward in a flurry of burning wicker and spark. Dougal turned back towards where Riona had disappeared, but Cranks grabbed the chain. No, said the Azura. She'll be back, I hope. Dougal had to nod. Already the battle had abated to the point that the members of the Blood Legion were pointing up at them on the hillside, and about a half dozen members of the Victorious Legion were hustling up to collect them. Dougal had time to stow his picks and stand there docilely while Crank conspicuously pulled the other end of the chain, tried to look both in charge and non-threatening. Char Patrol gathered up their gear and pushed Dougal down the slope to the rest of the troop ahead of them. Ember was already arguing with some officer when they arrived. These are my prisoners, said Ember. I demand you release them to me at once. We appreciate your help, Doomforge, replied the officer, another female Char with tawny fur, but I cannot allow you to pass without knowing your business. I am in the business of Malice Sword Shadow, the Ash Legion Imperator, said Ember, snarling. I cannot and will not tell you the nature of my mission, nor should you, came a deep, resonant voice from the perimeter of the discussion. I will be dining with Sword Shadow at the end of the week, and I shall take the opportunity to ask the Imperator about it. The soldiers parted to reveal the commanding Char, the one with coal-black fur and hard, angry eyes. His fiery blade was now sheathed. Dougal could tell by his ease and swagger that he was the top cat in this army. What surprised Dougal most of all was the way that Ember immediately stiffened with the arrival of the newcomer, coming fully to attention and executing a perfect salute. She was more intimidated by this Char commander than she was even by Almora Soulkeeper. Ember Doomforge, Ash Legion, detached, sir, he barked. At ease, soldier, said the dark-furred Char. Ember did not relax a single hair. These are yours? Yes, sir, said Ember. I am taking these prisoners in for questioning. They were found near the Dragon Brand. The dark-furred Char grunted. You said prisoners, plural. I think you're missing one or more of them. Ember wheeled and for the first time realized that Riona wasn't there. A look of shock and fear spread across her face. Where is she? She hissed at Cranks. The Azura stammered for a moment, then managed. We were assaulted by a flame rifleman. We drove him away, but in the confusion, the female human escaped. I expressed my deepest apology and will offer a refund. Just wonderful, muttered the dark-furred commander. Louder, he shouted. We have a mouse loose. I want it caught. Now, get trackers on it. Starting up on the hill. Sir, said Ember, and Dougal could almost sense the fear on her. I need the prisoner alive and unharmed. The commander grunted again and bellowed. I want the mouse alive and unharmed. Any of you bring her back in pieces, and I will have your guts for garters. Am I clear? There was a sharp expression of agreement, and the milling char broke into teams. Some gathered the deceased Blood Legion tar by the campfire for burning. Others laid out the dead Flame Legionnaires for the crows and vultures. Meanwhile, a large contingent headed up the hill. You will accompany us, said the commander. We will talk later. Sir, yes, sir, said Ember, who saluted again as the commander turned and marched over to where the other char were emptying the contents of the Flame Legion's tents. Ember did not relax as much fall in on herself. A picket of other Blood Legion formed up around them. Gullick took the chain from Cranks, and Ember had made a show of checking Dougal's neck manacle. What happened? Said the char, fussing with the still locked cuff. We were ambushed, like Crank said, whispered Dougal. The rifleman would have fried him, but I freed Riona, and she tackled him. The rifleman lit out, and Riona chased after him. Idiot, said Ember, and Dougal was unsure if she was talking about Cranks, Dougal, Riona, or herself. Then she added, keep your mouth shut and pray to your foolish gods. What's wrong? Dougal managed. I may have taken you from the skillet into the flames, said Ember. A regular char commander, I could bluster my way past, but this... What? The commanding officer, said Ember. He is Tribune Ridlock Brimstone, hero of my people. If he chooses to take you off my hands, there's nothing I can do to stop him.